You know where I would be. The fourth issue I'm going to prioritize, you're going to be most surprised with, is communication. The communication is obviously not just a men's issue, it's a men's and women's issue. But the reason it's so important is because every time feminists speak or AVFM speaks, there is a propensity to distort what the other person says and then to argue with the distorted version that the other person never meant to begin with. And when Arabs or Israelis speak, it's the same problem. When mothers and fathers and women and men speak, it's the same problem. In 30, 40 years of working with couples, one of the things that I found is that I've never had somebody say to me, "Warren, I want a divorce. My partner understands me." And I realized if I could put not a diamond ring on somebody, but if I could put inside of my psyche the ability to have compassion for and understand the person who was speaking with me, I would be a better husband than I would if I had the biggest diamond in the world to give my wife. The problem with that is, while everyone agrees with me, no one knows how to do it. Because biologically, when we heard criticism, we feared that there would be an enemy. And in order to survive, our biological response to the criticism had to be to put up defenses. Or, better yet, kill the enemy before the enemy kills us. And when we're criticized by our wife or our husband, that's what we want to do. We want to kill them before they kill us. That's functional for survival, but exactly the processes that were functional for survival are dysfunctional for love and dysfunctional for intimacy. And so I said before that our genetic heritage is in tension with our genetic future. That's what I mean. We got here by surviving. But we need to, we've upped the ante. Now we're not just need to be role mates, we have the potential to be soulmates. And soulmates require the ability to listen to each other. To listen to each other until we say that the other person says, "I feel completely understood." If I interrupt Liz and say, "I understand," what I'm doing is saying, "Shut up." She has to tell me she feels understood. So how do we do that? We do that if it's biologically, if we're programmed to respond defensively to criticism, and we respond more defensively the more we love somebody, because the more we love somebody, the more vulnerable we feel. The more vulnerable we feel, the more likely we are to get angry, not be centered. Anger is just vulnerability's mask. We get angry at the people that reject us that we love, not the people that reject somebody that we don't love. A woman calls a guy and a woman go out at night, and the guy does not call back in the morning. If the woman calls the man a jerk for not coming back, you know that she had interest in him. If she didn't have interest in him, she'd call it relief that he didn't call back. When we call people names, when we cut them off like that, it's because it hurts less to be rejected by an object than it does to be rejected by a human being. Construction workers call women, whistle at women. They treat women as sex objects because it hurts less to be rejected by somebody that they know is going to reject them. They're not worthy of that beautiful woman walking by the construction site, so they objectify her. When the woman calls a man a jerk, it's because she felt that man evaluated her as not being worthy of him. And so if we have such deeply engaged resistance to being able to hear others, especially when they love us, what do we do with that? We do a work. So one of the things that what I do with couples in my couples workshops is I've developed a workaround to be able to work around the biological propensity to be able to be defensive when you're criticized, to be able to hear people, as to associate the criticism with love, an opportunity to be loved. But how do I do that? By creating an altered space. No one can do that in a natural space. You have to meditate yourself into a space where you are receptive to associating being criticized with being loved. That meditation takes at least a 10 to 15-hour training for people to learn how to do. It means separating out the week, so you have 2 hours of the week in caring and sharing mode and 166 other hours in a conflict-free zone. You have to know how to deal with the conflict-free zone when conflict comes up. Those are the types of things that when we work on them for men and for women, we begin to solve domestic violence, because domestic violence is not about power. Domestic violence is about a momentary act of power designed for an underlying experience of powerlessness. And so so the solution to domestic violence is to not tell men, give up your power. The solution to domestic violence is teaching both sexes how to feel empowered by and how to empower the other gender and their children and their parents. That's why communication is so important.
Amen.
Now I'm going to go from being a nice guy to being a tougher guy. Issue number 5, men's studies. 150,000 women a year take women's studies courses. When you or I contact the media, if they're focused on gender issues, to a large degree, a very high percentage of them have a women's studies background. And so when I am being interviewed by NPR, even if I spend 3 hours with the associate producer and convince her that there really is legitimacy to the men's issues, she summarizes in bullet points my talk, and her producer says, the guy's crazy. And you are just too weak to see his craziness. You're too weak to see his manipulativeness. And so therefore, no go. And so we're up against a huge wall there. Now, so what do we do if there's men's studies courses and women's studies courses in virtually every university in the industrialized world, and virtually no men's studies courses that are real men's studies courses, the type of men's studies we're talking about here, just feminist men's studies courses in the universities? So I finished a game of tennis some years ago with a guy, and we both belong to the same think tank. And when we finished, he said, well, what do you do? And I go, tell him about what I do. And he goes, wow, that is fascinating. And I said, well, what do you do? And he says, I'm the president of Northwestern University. And I say, well, I'm fascinated that you're fascinated by these issues. People are always fascinated at people that are fascinated with them. And he said, I said, are you interested in maybe being the first university in the world that brings men's issues into Northwestern University? And his response was, and have me fired? And I said, how's that? I think I knew how that was, but he said, because the feminists would have me up on a stake within hours, and this was just at the beginning of social media time. And so I said, so I reversed the question. I said, is there anything that we could do to bring men's studies to Northwestern University without even missing a beat? He said, of course, sue me. Sue the university. And I said, tell me more. He said, and he said, if you sued me, I'd have to bring men's studies into the university, and I would be a hero because I was avoiding a lawsuit. And I'd be able to say to the feminists, we had to do this in order to be able to not be sued. And if we were sued, we'd end up having to do things like eliminate the women's studies program. So we have a choice. We can either eliminate the women's studies program or bring in... or bring in an equal and opposite men's studies program that really is a men's studies program. And so I said, any other complication? And he said, yes, you have to have standing. And standing means that you have to have somebody at that university who really wants a men's studies program. So part of what we can do, if we make men's studies an issue, is recruit men and women on college campuses to file for a men's studies program. Maybe they'll succeed and just get it. But if they don't succeed and they want it, and there's a group of 2 or 3 or 4 men and or women who want a men's studies program that is a legitimate program on the college campus, and they don't respond, now we have a Title IX issue. Now we have also a potential violation, if it's a state university, a violation of Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now we have something to work with, but here's the big issue of men's studies. Once this happens at one university, particularly in states like California or Texas, once it happens at one university, all the universities who are usually comprised of academics, who usually have a great deal of fear, not that much courage, they tend to respond by saying, "Oh my God, we've got to get our act together. We've got to do this." And so, one successful lawsuit at a significant university will have a ripple effect, as the coin that you created for us has on that coin a beautiful picture of a ripple effect. Will have a ripple effect at every university in this country. That is, every university that gets any federal funding, which is about 97% of universities in this country. But what happens in the United States also happens in the entire world, usually. And so this will have one university, one group of 3 or 4 students can have a ripple effect across the entire world. That's why I believe it should be in the top 10 men's issues. Number 6 is a men's birth control pill. Yes. And this is not just because Cardinal Smith is here. We often heard, I think correctly so, that a women's pill was probably the single greatest instrument of freedom for women in the 20th century. I would say that's a pretty reasonable assessment. But it's interesting that we have been within just a hair's reach of being able to develop a men's pill for more than 30 years. I wrote about this in one of my early books, wrote about it before even the myth of male power. I went around to scientists and found, was a men's pill viable? And the answer was yes. So I went to pharmaceutical companies and said, why are you not doing this? The scientists now have the ability to create a men's birth control pill. We're not sure that the men really want one or that there's much of a market for one. We're not willing to sort of invest in the whole distribution and advertising. And my response is, are you kidding? And the pharmaceutical companies responded, you show me, we haven't received 100 letters from men in the last decade asking for that. When women want something, women speak up. When men want something, we keep it to ourselves. And then we wonder why companies can't hear what men don't say. We need to speak up. That's why A Voice for Men is one of the most perfect titles, and this is one of the most perfect forums to begin that process. Number 7. Men's health intelligence. In other words, I didn't say men's mental health, men's physical health, but men's health intelligence. The reason we are so unintelligent in terms of health is because every society that survived based on its ability to train its sons to be disposable. Disposable in work as warriors, disposable in war as warriors, disposable in work as firefighters, as workers on oil rigs and so on, coal miners, and indirectly, therefore, disposable as dads. Now, if your survival is dependent upon your disposability, that means your disposability keeps you alive as a nation, not the health of the boy. If you train a boy to be worried about his health, worried about hurting himself, that doesn't lead to a boy who's willing to risk himself, his disposability, to go to war. If I'm trained to really care about you and love you, and I do go to war, and you die and your blood is splattered all over me, I go into major trauma. If I learn to not care about you, I go into much less trauma. The degree to which men learn to love, the degree to which we learn to think of ourselves, the degree to which we learn to ask for health and help for ourselves is the degree to which we were hesitant to be disposable. Therefore, we jeopardize the survival of the country. So what was functional for the health of a nation was dysfunctional for the health of a boy. And so that is why we are unwilling to talk about mental health issues. This is why when boys and girls are 9 years of age, we commit suicide at exactly the same rate. But as boys learn, get the hormones and the socialization of masculinity, how do we evolve? We evolve by, at the age of 10 to 14, as we get the beginnings of masculinity, we commit suicide twice as much as girls. Between the age of 15 and 19, 4 times as much. Between the ages of 20 and 25, 5 times as much. So we are, as we learn to, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Not when the going gets tough, we have 5 or 6 ways to express our feelings like Tom Golden talks about, or other ways to directly express our feelings. We don't learn the different modalities that are both comfortable for us as traditional men and comfortable for us as less traditional men to express feelings, or to be able to act it out, or be able to honor, or to be able to do the other things that Tom so articulately talked about yesterday. When we have a nation that hasn't rethought through its disposability propensities for boys, what we have is boys out there saying, girls out there saying, cheerleaders, 1st and 10, do it again, 1st and 10, do it again. And what are the women saying to the guys? They're saying to the guys, 1st and 10, do it again, risk spinal cord injuries, risk concussions, risk shoulders dislocated, and still play. If you have a dislocated shoulder, I remember watching a college game where the news people were saying, isn't it incredible that Joe, with a dislocated shoulder, is still tossing the football so accurately? Well, he should be calling the doctor. Not tossing a football, but we are honoring him for risking further damage to himself. NFL means not for long for a reason. Because the people who are rewarded and are the heroes of women and men all around the world, they are people who don't often live for long, who are often walking around barely able to walk at the age of 50, and the very thing that they were honored for is exactly the thing that they're weakest in. We need to question this. We need to question this at every level of society. We need to question, why is it that men die 5 years sooner than women when we used to die in 1920, only 1 year sooner than women? And very few people, A, know that, and B, despite the fact that we die earlier of all 10 leading causes of death, there are 7 federal offices of women's health and 0 federal offices of men's health. That is the type of issue that will need to be surfaced. That is also suable. That is not, men do not get due process. Men do not get equal protection when we don't have equal protection in the very most important area, which is living. Thank you. Okay. That's number 7. Number 8 is coming up. 2009, President Obama is just elected. I get a phone call. Pick up the phone. The woman says, we understand that you were on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women for a number of years. President Obama has just formed a White House Council on Women and Girls. We'd like you to be an advisor to the council. you'd like to be? I said, of course. And she says, but I said, before you hang up, is it possible perhaps that you could have a White House Council on men and boys as well? And she says, huh? And I go, well, and I explained a few reasons. She said, oh, never thought of that. Interesting. But she said, actually, though, I am in charge of filling councils that already exist. I have no authorization to actually create councils of my own. I said, totally understand that. If I created a proposal for a council, would you be open to sort of looking at it? And she says, yeah, well, I'd look at it, sure. And I said, would you pass it on to maybe receptive people within the White House? Yeah, I can do that. And so I decided that I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to get the top 30 people in the country that I could think of that were authors on boys' issues, that were people who were liberals, people who were conservatives, people who were practitioners like the head of the Boy Scouts, people who wrote about these things in a different type of way for a different audience, like the head of Men's Health, people like Tom Golden who are practitioner counselors that are actually working on these issues. I got all these people together, and for a period of 18 months, you can imagine when you have libertarians, conservatives, and liberals all on one council, what these dialogues were like, with sometimes 25, 30 people. Tom is shaking his head because he remembers some of these discussions. But we finally hammered out a very significant proposal to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. When we did it, it basically, long story short, went nowhere. It almost went somewhere many times, but always at the last second, there was somebody that knocked it out of the agenda to actually present it to President Obama. Somebody that 5 minutes before it was on their agenda, they were going to be seeing President Obama 5 minutes later. Why do we need a White House Council on Boys and Men? Because boys and men are having problems in almost every single area. We're falling behind girls and women educationally, economically. When we fall behind economically and educationally, I don't know a lot of women who are that interested in marrying men in the unemployment lines. And so this affects not only our sons, but also our daughters, also marriages, and therefore whether children grow up in intact or intact families. The reason, one of the most incredible statistics, the reason a few years ago, 53% of women who had children without being married, is because many of those women could not find men who earned a decent living, and that often translates for many women into, I just don't want to take care of another child. And so when a man doesn't earn decent money, it has an impact not only on the man, not only on the woman, but on the ability of the children to have a father in that child's life, and therefore on the ability of the boy to see that he has a role model of some person who can be respected and can be productive. A boy who looks at a role model of a father that's disowned, that is put down, he is not a boy who feels he has much of a future. He's a boy that goes adrift. He's a boy that gets lost. He's a boy that has no sense of purpose. And that is what we have today. So a White House Council on Boys and Men deals with many issues, because boys and men are dealing with many issues, and many issues are being dealt with in different departments of the government. It's crucial for a White House to be able to coordinate that. But it's also crucial for a White House not just to be the government as substitute savior. It's also important for the White House to conduct an interactive relationship with private companies that also do work. And the White House is doing that now with Brothers Keeper and with the White House Council on Women and Girls. But with adult white males, it is doing nothing. That's number 8. And number 9. Feel this building. This is the building of men who are the ultimate in being willing to be disposable. What we don't know about these men is that recently, in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, for each man who was killed in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the number who were killed by suicide is 25. 25 that killed themselves by suicide for each one that